Hello and welcome to Makeup and Media Analysis, in which I sit down, I do my makeup and I talk about a film, a TV show, a book, maybe even some music that I've consumed recently and that I have some critical thoughts about. I never claimed to be a makeup artist, so let's just hope with the media analysis it's better than the makeup. So today we're talking about Line of Duty, so I'm going to do a smoky eye because it's a very dark show. On the 4th of August 2011, 29-year-old Mark Duggan was shot dead by Metropolitan Police. Mark Duggan was a young black man who was known to the police for gang activity, and at the time that he was shot he was in possession of a handgun, but he wasn't actually firing at the police or anything, he wasn't actually even holding it. The officer responsible for Mark Duggan's death was never charged. The first episode of Line of Duty premiered on the 26th of June 2012, and in the first episode, the show's protagonist, a man called Steve Arnott, decides to join an anti-corruption unit after an Asian man is unlawfully shot. I'm just saying, I think there was an influence there. Much of Line of Duty's first season is concerned with police corruption and race. That season's lead, a man named Tony Gates, is a black officer accused of corruption. When AC-12 begin investigating Tony Gates, the police are hesitant to bring any charges against him because they don't have enough black representation within the police force. 5 seasons later, Line of Duty is a flagship BBC drama. Each episode rakes in 11 million views. And sure, you can binge it, but you don't get that same thrill of seeing 5 million tweets about how only Jenny from Gogglebox could solve all of this. Did I just isolate all of my non-British audience? Probably. Well, I don't really have any audience, so it doesn't matter. But I digress. The purpose of this video is to actually discuss whether Line of Duty is putting forward an argument that we should abolish use of the police. A lot of the abolitionist discourse that sprung up around last year's BLM protests was very American-centric. This is for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, the murder that began the riots, the murder of George Floyd, happened in America. Furthermore, it is easy to draw a direct line between the present American police force and the former slave patrols that preceded them. Unsurprisingly, a police force that was invented to capture freed black slaves. You know, it might be a bit racist. I'm going to get my little brush out to put the black in. This is going swimmingly so far. Should I have done it the other way around? Potentially, but this is how I saw it done on TikTok. In the UK, the police force was invented by Conservative Prime Minister Robert Peel, essentially to, control the working class. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. We're going to blend it out, I think. Are we? Let's see. The important thing that both British and American policing have in common is that they were both invented as a means of social control. I'm just going to try and pack the black on as a means to resolve this. No, I'm going to start again with the eyes, that was really bad. In his book, The End of Policing, Alex S. Vitale wrote how Peel developed his ideas while managing the British colonial occupation of Ireland and seeking new forms of social control that would allow for continued political and economic domination in the face of growing insurrections, riots and political uprisings. And for many years since, that's essentially what the police have done. They have been a tool for the working class to oppress. No, they've been a tool for the upper class to oppress the working class. All the way from the Peterborough massacre to the present-day Kill the Bill riots. Said bill has been introduced by proto-fascist Home Secretary Priti Patel. Essentially, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill gives the police much more power to break up protests. The language in the bill is utterly ridiculous. It says anyone that causes, quote, serious annoyance could be fined up to £2,500 for causing serious annoyance. Some lawyers told Parliament that, a 10-year sentence for public nuisance is, disproportionate. Unsurprisingly, the bill is also incredibly racist. There is a lot of language in there that increases stop and search powers, which are disproportionately used to target young black men. The point of me telling you all this is that when we're discussing policing in Line of Duty, it's important that we discuss it in the British context. For us here in the UK, the police aren't here to protect us, they're here to protect the establishment. And they've been doing an absolutely bang-up job of it. The police work for parasites like the monarchy or, Boris Johnson. They're not here to protect the ordinary people. And it's these issues in which Line of Duty brings out some pretty good critiques. LOD's USP is the fact that they don't try and spoon feed the audience. So, you know, they like to use a lot of acronyms. Jed Mercurio, the show's writer and creator, has admitted to using real-life examples of police corruption to inspire his writing. So, let's look at some of these examples of real-life police corruption and think, how could they have influenced Line of Duty's opinion of the police? Jill Dando was a British journalist that was murdered outside her home on the 26th of January 1999. Dando was a journalist and television personality who was best known for her work on the BBC television programme Crime Watch. And this next bit is going to get a bit graphic, so fair warning. Jill Dando was shot in the back of the head, and the muzzle of the gun was so close to her head that her skull absorbed the sound of the shot, so like neighbours didn't hear it. When a neighbour did eventually find Miss Dando, she thought that she had been stabbed, because there was just so much blood. In 2001, a man named Barry George, who had a history of sexual offences and was kind of obsessed with Jill Dando, was prosecuted for her murder. But George was later acquitted on the grounds that his IQ wasn't high enough to have pulled off such a professional hit. After the Jimmy Savile sex abuse scandal, Dando's name hit the papers again because it was claimed that prior to her death, Jill Dando had been investigating historic child sexual abuse within the BBC. Conspiracy theorists thought, hey, what if she was killed to keep quiet? If you've seen season 6 of LOD, you're probably seeing quite a few similarities between the murder of Jill Dando and the murder of journalist Gail Vella. In the show, the police attempt to pin the murder of Gail Vella on Terry Boyle, a man with Down syndrome who has been used as a pawn by the OCG since season 1. In real life, Jill Dando's murder remains unsolved to this day, and many believe that is because of police corruption. However, there was another influence on the murder of Gail Vella. This time, it was a journalist who had the maiden name Vella. On the 16th of October 2017, journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, I think that's how it's pronounced right, I watched a few BBC clips on it. Essentially, she was driving close to her home when a bomb went off in her car, and sadly it killed her instantly. This was not the first time that Caruana Galizia had received death threats. It wasn't even the first time she'd been the victim of a violent attack. In 1996, her front door was set on fire and her dog had its throat slit. 10 years later, the house was set on fire when Caruana Galizia and her young sons were still inside. After she started blogging, 2 more of her dogs were strangled and poisoned. I mean, like, that's just evil. Like, everyone knows in true crime, like, you can kill a human and that's, you know, bad. But you don't kill a dog, that's just evil. Caruana Galizia was probably best known for her blog that spoke out against institutional corruption. She wrote on important political cases such as the Panama Papers scandal. That's not even how you say Panama, is it? Fuck's sake. Her murder is rumoured to be connected to the corrupt Maltese government. On the 4th of December 2017, 10 individuals were arrested in corruption with Caruana Galizia's murder, but it was also rumoured to be connected to corrupt Prime Minister Joseph Muscat. So, you know, she was killed by a high-ranking OCG with political connections. The 1993 murder of Stephen Lawrence is possibly the most famous race-related murder in UK history. Stephen was waiting for a bus, and there's this one detail of the case that always kills me. Stephen could have walked home, but he was only waiting for that bus because he wanted to be home early because his mother had just arrived home after visiting some relatives in Jamaica. Both of Stephen's parents were Jamaican immigrants to the UK. And if you want to know a little bit more about the utterly disgraceful treatment of British Jamaicans, I advise, I don't know, googling the Windrush scandal and starting from there. Maybe read a bit of Andrea Levy, because it's rough, folks. Is this concealer even doing anything, or am I just dotting at my skin? On the 22nd of April 1993, Stephen was rushed by a group of 5 youths who stabbed him in the shoulder. They went into his clavicle, and they were shouting racial slurs at him as they performed this attack. And sadly they killed him, and Stephen was only 18. It was just a really, really, really awful story. Whenever I'm doing makeup around my eyes, I'm cautious that I'm gonna somehow make my contacts go like into my brain or something. Stephen was murdered by 5 men. Gary Dobson, brothers Neil and Jamie Acorn, Luke Knight and Jamie Norris. Jamie Norris. It is widely known to the British public that these men are responsible because the Daily Mail published a front page saying the Mail accuses these 5 men, and then they provided photographs of the 5 men, of murder. And if we're wrong, you can sue us, essentially. And, you know, they've never been sued. You know, the Daily Mail, it's like a broken clock. Maybe it gets things right twice in the entire history of the world. However, sadly today, only Gary Dobson and David Norris. Did I say Luke Norris? No. It's either David or Jamie Norris. I can't remember. I think it's Jamie. However, the point is, only 2 of the men that murdered Stephen Lawrence are currently in prison. Because, you know, the Metropolitan Police, they butchered the investigation. Because they're racist. Quite simply. In 1993, the CPS, that's the Crown Prosecution Service, dropped the case against these 5 assailants, even though there were witnesses confirming that they were there, because they said there wasn't enough evidence, and they didn't really do enough forensic testing. Stephen's family had to pay for private prosecution, so this meant Stephen's family had to pay for the re-examination of the evidence, because the Metropolitan Police just couldn't be bothered. Like, who cares if a young black man gets killed, right? And after they paid to, you know, have all this forensic evidence re-examined and to have all the witnesses, you know, found and re-interviewed, they were again told there was not sufficient evidence to prosecute this case. In 2006, new forensic evidence was suddenly discovered, and in 2010, the Director of Public Prosecutions, who was just, you know, this guy, this unimportant guy, not very, you know, contemporary or relevant at all to British politics, he was just called, you know, Keir Starmer. He decided to fight for Dobson. He decided to fight against Dobson's original acquittal, and he was like, "Yeah, fucking prosecute this case. These guys are murderers. They need to be in prison." Keir Starmer is now the leader of the Labour Party, which is the opposition party in the UK, and even though he, you know, fought to have the most famous race-related murder in the UK prosecuted, you know, possibly the biggest achievement of his career, he has now decided to call the BLM protests a moment and, like, dismiss them, essentially. So, you know, a lot of black voters are like, that's quite racist, Keir. You would think that somebody who spent so long, who the achievement of their career was to prosecute the men responsible for the most famous race-related murder in the UK, would probably actually have more sympathy for police, you know, institutionalised relations, very simple in the police. But no, that's probably too much to ask for. That's probably something Jeremy Corbyn would have said. So, Keir Starmer can't seem to be Jeremy Corbyn anyway. Why am I using my left hand? If you're worried about why my hands are tremoring, it's fine. I'm disabled. It just happens. It's very annoying when I try and buy wine from the shop because they think I'm an alcoholic, and I just want to be like, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just disabled. Please don't prevent me from buying wine. Just because I'm a bit shaky. Anywho, I'm going to stop ranting about Keir Starmer because the doctor said I need to watch my blood pressure. Stephen's case was eventually prosecuted in 2011. And like I said, on the 3rd of January 2012, only 2 of his murderers got sent down. And even before they were arrested, they had 16 years of freedom. In that time, they could have, you know, gotten married, had children, maybe even completed that architecture degree that Stephen was always really looking forward to. And of course, 3 of the men that killed him are still free. They're still free! I get very angry about this case because it's just indicative of the way the UK treats its black citizens, which is appalling. Anyway, the point of me talking about Stephen Lawrence is that in season 6, we learned that prior to her death, Gail Vella had been investigating the murder of a young black man named Lawrence Christopher. But, you know, he's very subtle on his naming choices, isn't he? Oh, Jed. When we're learning about the investigation of Lawrence Christopher, Chloe, who is like the only black character in season 6, who is a police officer, she gets much more like emotionally involved with it than the white character. The white characters don't really do any of the actual police work in season 6. It's entirely Chloe. I hope that that actress was paid a hefty amount in her paycheck. I doubt she was. Anyway, not the point. Point is, the name Lawrence Christopher actually alludes to another race-related murder in the UK. I'm going to start doing all my videos with my window open because it means I sweat a lot less. I'm a very sweaty person. It's now time to contour, and this is, it might have been like, you know, acceptably bad by this point, but this is where it's going to get terrible, so I apologise to any makeup artists in the audience. So, on the 1st of April 1998, Christopher Alder was assaulted outside a nightclub. I need to put more foundation on. He was then taken to the Hull Royal Infirmary, where staff said his behaviour was extremely troublesome. I don't know what that means either. Isn't it mad that this is the palest colour that Charlotte Tilbury offers, and it's still too dark for my skin tone? Being a pasty bitch is a really hard job, guys. Christopher Alder was then removed from the hospital by the police, and he, you know, died in police custody. I say removed, witnesses say he was dragged. Alder was dragged, handcuffed and unconscious into the police station. In 2000, a coroner's jury said that Alder was unlawfully killed, but, you know, the 5 men who killed him, they were tried at least, but they were acquitted by a judge in 2002. Once again, we can see a clear inspiration for Jed Mercurio. The police may not have killed Stephen Lawrence themselves, but they were the reason that 3 of his murderers are still free, because they botched the investigation. And, you know, an autopsy concluded that Christopher Alder wouldn't have died from the injuries that he came into at the hospital that day. This is what we call contouring when you're as pale as I am. I'm getting a big fluffy brush out now. And now, the case that LOD said by name. This is how they do it on TikTok. I don't know if that's how I should do it, but I don't know, I'm trying. Jimmy Savile was a famous British media personality. His show, Jim Will Fix It, was a staple of children's television programming from the 70s until the 90s on the BBC. You know, that same BBC that Jill Dando worked for, and the same BBC that Line of Duty is broadcast on. Has that done anything? I doubt it. He died a national treasure in 2011 after, you know, being knighted because he gave so much money to charity. Then, you know, in 2012 it was discovered that he had abused over 250 children over 50 years. And that this was, you know, an open secret in the BBC. Allegations surfaced that there was a culture of paedophilia. Why won't this blend? At the BBC. Clownery on the YouTube. After Jimmy Savile was exposed as a predator, other children's TV presenters such as Rolf Harris were also exposed. Luckily, because Harris was still alive, we could actually, you know, prosecute him. It's fine, it's in front of the camera, it's basically drag. The Savile case was a huge indictment of the BBC. Because perpetrators like Jimmy Savile were considered an open secret. The way he got away with it for so long was because he always attacked vulnerable children. You know, he was famous for his charity work. He used to visit children in hospitals, you know, some of which were paraplegic, couldn't even move. And he would rape them. I think we're going to have to just accept that's going to be what the contour looks like, ladies and gents and... No, ladies and gentlemen. That's the one I really like. Central plotline of LOD Series 3 is that AC-12 investigate a firearms officer who has been unlawfully shooting people. The perpetrator of these shootings is later exposed to have been a victim of serious child sexual abuse while he was living in a foster home. The show even had the balls to show the fictional perpetrators shaking hands with Jimmy Savile on the BBC, which is the network that enabled Jimmy Savile for 50 years. It's mad. It's weird that the BBC like to air all their dirty laundry like this, you know, on their own network channel. But I guess it's like what people usually do. They just like to say, yeah, we messed up, but, you know, it wasn't that bad. So we forget that it was that bad. In 2011, the Telegraph reported that crime fiction had officially become the world's most popular genre of fiction. The Telegraph quoted best-selling author David Baldacci's explanation as to why the genre is having a moment in turbulent political times. Quote, People inherently don't like folks who do bad to get away with it. In real life they do, but in novels, evil is punished and the good guys mostly win. Baldaki's comment can be seen in the conventional ending of detection fiction narrative because usually once the criminal is found, then order is restored. As Maria states, quote, "Murder is a matter of place, a stain on the general order that needs to be swept clean. And the appeal of crime fiction is based in the interpretive desire of the detective and the reader. How did it happen? Who did it?" Aristomedo's argument succinctly explains why detective fiction is appealing to mass audiences. The formulaic, repetitive structure aims to bring about justice by uncovering truth. I am a professional makeup artiste, darling. An artiste. And when this truth, detectives aim to make a clear distinction between good and evil. In A Companion to Crime Fiction, critics characterise detective fiction as a rare form of widely read contemporary literature that still attempts to distinguish between right and wrong. But these ideas of right and wrong are problematised by the genre's constraints. Aristomedo notes, by portraying the law and its enforcement as natural and self-evident, the genre helps circulate the idea that crime and the law are outside any specific social context and concrete historical developments. Moreover, detective fiction tends to have this deep pessimism about social inequality. Rather than proposing any form of radical solution to prevent crime in the first place, it's just sort of like, oh well, this person was poor and driven to a life of crime, or this man was a violent misogynist and so this woman died. That's sad. Isn't that bad? Yes, that's bad. And then the reader's like, that is bad, but, you know, tomorrow you're going to go across to the next village and the same thing's going to happen again. So what does this all mean? In 2021, a year after we've seen some of the biggest protests against police brutality, why are we still writing crime fiction that posits a simple divide between good and evil? Line of Duty does sometimes try to blur the line, but at the end of the day, it is all often just the straight coppers that are in it to protect people and bring about justice, and the bent coppers who are just there for their own needs and to, you know, kill people that get in their way. And besides, all the bent coppers are in the pockets of the OCG anyway. Occasionally the show does hint at like deeper issues that cause people to go and work for the OCG, but by season 6 it's just this ridiculous conspiracy. Anybody evil ever is all in the pockets of this one organisation. Like, what's that supposed to tell us about the systemic issues that cause crime? In their article, Crime and Criminal Justice under Capitalism and Socialism, towards a Marxist perspective, Horston and Platt argue that capitalist developments and capitalist forms of crime are mystified by treating them as natural and the result of static universal processes, rather than as political and the result of historical and dialectical processes. Literally, is there any fucking sport on? What is it with men, and whenever there's something in sport, they have to, like, you know, go right to the bottom of their diagram. They have to go right to the bottom of their diaphragm to go, yes! You know, to prove their masculinity or some shit. I don't know. Anyway, as Horsford and Platt describe, capitalism makes us think that crime is just natural. It's just something that happens if you're bad. And it's not. It's the result of poverty. It's the result of social inequality. It's a result of, you know, boys will be boys, and the assumption that men are not emotional, they're only violent, and it's about sexual repression and all these other really complicated historical issues that are, you know, the consequence will be these crimes. God, that was so well articulated. The point is, when crime fiction portrays crime fighting, we think, yeah, we as the audience are already predisposed to think that crime is a natural part of life. So we don't investigate how capitalism has shaped our understanding of criminality. If a man steals a loaf of bread to feed his starving family, etc., etc. But this assumption that crime is a natural part of the society, it becomes problematic when considering how capitalism has shaped our understanding of criminality. Peter Neyroud and Alan Beckley, both senior police figures, wrote that crime fighting implies the domination of an enemy. And this unseen enemy is a central part of LOD's storyline. It's implied that once we find H and defeat him, then maybe all police corruption will be over. There is nuance to this perspective. For example, if AC-12 start investigating a fellow officer, the officers that work with that officer will probably attack them. For example, when Lindsay Denton, was about to say Saran Jones, but it's not Saran Jones, it's Keely Hawes. When Lindsay Denton was thought to have killed another one of the police force, you know, because she's just corrupt, her fellow officers tried to drown her in the toilet. And they're not part of the OCG, I don't think. It's never, you know, shown that they are. It's just there is this inherent violence within the police. And if a character ends up in prison, it's part and parcel. They're going to be subject to physical or verbal abuse. However, there's a bit of a problem with this, because by season 6, it's always the same 2 prison wardens that are doling out this abuse, and it's not investigating how maybe the position of prison warden or the idea of prisons in general, it's a means of social control. I mean, I think that's going to be the byline of this video. Everything is a means of social control. Each season of LOD centres around one crime. There are other crimes interspersed, but there is one central crime in which the narrative follows through from episode 1 to episode 6. Or 8, I think there's 8 in season 6, whatever. These crimes always bring up the wider conspiracy of H. Therefore, these crimes that spark, you know, wider issues of police corruption can be described as flashpoints. The 2016 LSE article, The Biggest Gang, Police and People in 2011 England Riots, investigates how violent clashes between the police and the public become flashpoints, wherein said clashes encapsulate a wide array of social grievances. The article argues that police work is at the heart of social conflict, and that, perhaps particularly at times of significant upheaval, the police becomes an easy substitute for other grievances and concerns. The article supports this argument that the police are an easy substitute for other grievances and concerns by quoting young people participating in 2011 England riots. The young people quoted in this article said they held disdain for the Conservative government because of racial inequality and the implementation of austerity, which led to mass unemployment amongst the youth. The police can be argued to be at the centre of all social conflict because they are the enforcers of institutional violence. The article points to riots before the 2011 clashes, such as the 1960s urban riots and the 1981 Brixton riots, which are all very related to racial inequality. The argument is that these riots were caused when these massive issues of societal inequality were all encapsulated in one case. Essentially, every detective narrative is therefore a flashpoint crime, because that crime will encapsulate wider social grievances that the detective will probably point out. And the detective is usually on the side of the victim, the person that is most affected by not only the crime, but also the social issues that cause the crime. And the conclusions that the detective takes from this investigation will shape the text's political narrative. As Sally R. Munt argues, detective fiction is a genre ostensibly committed to moral enlightenment. So what the detective, who is a figure of truth and justice, concludes about a crime, that's probably what the narrative thinks is the issue that caused the crime in the first place. Not worded very well, but you know what I mean. As I said earlier, season 6 of Line of Duty focuses on the murder of Gail Vella, and this murder brings up wider issues about police corruption. For example, the fact that Gail Vella had been investigating how the police had covered up sexual abuse scandals, or how Gail Vella had been investigating how the police had committed a racially motivated murder against a young black man. Although LOD focuses on police corruption, I would argue that the show actually isn't doing anything that revolutionary. I'd argue that it kind of is a conventional detective narrative. In the introduction to Crime Fiction and the Law, Maria Aristamido summarises Svetlana Todorov's analysis of detective fiction. The classical detective story, as analysed by Svetlana Todorov, consists typically of 2 stories: the story of the crime, involving action and often blood, followed by the story of the investigation, involving inquiry, revelation and closure. Such stories chart the progress from a community whose order and stability are temporarily disrupted by a crime that breaks the rules, back to order and stability once the criminal has been identified and his or her crime explained by a suitable motive. You'd think that teenage boys could walk down the stairs a little bit quieter, wouldn't you? You would think that. Detective fiction usually ends with an order and stability wherein the disrupted social order is restored and existing social norms validated. The restored social order at the end of a text returns the audience to a comforting world. Shut up! The restored social order at the end of a text returns the audience to a comforting world in which justice has been served and order has been restored, but institutional forces remain. Line of Duty is interesting because it doesn't really provide that sense of closure. Like, we might know who did it, but we don't often get justice. At the end of every season, there's a biography type setup where we get shots of the main characters from that season and what has happened to them, and more often than not, the end of the season will say, even though AC-12 solved the case and we know exactly who did it, there were no charges pressed. Justice. However, the show still seems to endorse the idea of straight or like good police officers, and in the wake of last year's BLM protests, lots of people were saying that actually a quote-unquote good police officer is the exception to the rule rather than the rule. It's not just a few bad apples, it's the institutionalised corruption inherent within a system such as policing. I'm fairly certain that most of these cases about how the police will shove out any attempt at a good policing mainly took place in the US. However, I am sick of Europeans ignoring institutional police violence because we're just like, oh, we're better than the Americans. But with all the intrigue of, Hastings is H. No, maybe it's Steve. No. It was Kate. Viewers know that in Line of Duty there's still good guys and there's bad guys. And the good guys, they're police officers that really believe in public duty. Sally R. Munt describes this trope as one of the outsider. Munt describes the trope of the outsider as thus: the perceived social order is inherently corrupt, fallen, and the outsider represents the harbinger of truth and justice amongst hostility. In LOD, the only chance for justice is this little ragtag group of outsiders. Hastings was discriminated against in his original job because he's a Catholic, and then when he's in his current job it's because he's too old. Steve gets kind of bullied a lot, I don't know. And Kate, Kate's a woman, so she's obviously going to be discriminated against by the police force. But these outsiders, they believe in the uniform. They believe that the police is a force for good. However, this ragtag group of outsiders, they're not shown as being inherently pure. For example, in Season 4, Hastings is shown to perpetrate racist and misogynistic language towards Roz Huntley, even though we later learn that she effectively committed manslaughter because she was attacked by a male co-worker, a white male co-worker at that. And I suppose the show never says that murder is just evil. It's often just implied, but criminals don't necessarily begin their career of crime just because they're evil. For example, the characters of Ryan and Dot are both young working class boys who are offered an opportunity to have a better life, to have more money, to provide for themselves. We don't learn that much about Dot's backstory, but we learn that the position of the caddy has always been held by a young working class boy who can get out of these essentially impoverished circumstances if he just works as a police officer. And in Season 1, when we see little Ryan, we see that his mother basically just doesn't care about him. We see that all she seems to care about is cigarettes and shouting at the police. We see that when he is interacting with Kate, he's actually really small and vulnerable. Even though he is shouting all of these swear words at Tony Gates, he's still just a little kid who is being taken advantage of. And of course, as mentioned previously, the entire storyline of Season 3 is about how exploited children often end up committing crime because Danny Waldron was sexually abused while he was in a children's home. The series is not just critical of crime, it's also critical of the causes of crime. Paraphrase Tony Blair and Sadiq Khan in the most recent election. I thought that was a slogan we left in 1997, but no! And even though it is the same two prison guards every season, the show is quite anti-prison. It's not Angela Davis level critique, but the prison system is shown to be harsh, violent, the last place that anyone would want to go if they want to be rehabilitated. I wrote an earlier draft of a script before the Season 6 finale when we didn't know who H was. And before we knew who H was, I thought my analysis was simple. Line of Duty says, yeah, there are people that are in the police that are bad, but you know, it's all because of this one guy called H. And if we take him down, then police corruption is going to be over. And then the finale happened. H is Ian Buckles, a moronic police officer that's been there since Season 1. He's such an insane choice for being the mastermind behind it all that, what's his name? Craig Parkinson spent the whole season of the Line of Duty podcast talking about how Buckles is an absolute wally. There's no way it's him. That wouldn't be satisfying. Making an incompetent Brommy the mastermind behind all this police corruption could have been an amazing critique if the episode wasn't rubbish. The best season finale in Line of Duty history is the season 3 shootout. I think that's a quite universally held opinion. And the thing is, the season 3 finale has essentially the same moral as the season 6 finale. We've found the caddy, we take him down. That doesn't mean police corruption is over. Because at the end of the day, police corruption will always be bigger than one man. And this finale is also kind of tragic. At the end of the day, Doc sacrificed himself to save Kate. Kate could have loved him, but instead Doc was groomed from the age of 16. He could have been a good man, but instead he ends up getting shot. We know nothing about Buckles' backstory. He's just there. He's always there. And he's always boring. We learn that Buckles is evil because there's a very long interview. Chloe does all the work off screen to learn that he's evil, by the way. And the gang just sort of shows up and she just tells them everything. It's just, I wanted another urgent exit required. And when I was thinking more about why maybe they didn't do that, is because so much of last year's discourse around police was about police brutality, specifically about police using guns and about how they use guns to shoot the most vulnerable people, and if you're holding a gun and you're black, you're dead, you know, essentially. So maybe that was a consideration that was made, that when we're discussing institutionalised violence, maybe glorifying it in the way that they did when Kate jumped on the side of that truck with, you know, I was about to say AK-47, I don't know what kind of gun it is. I'm British, we don't know the names of guns over here. So maybe the decision to just make it like sitting in the grim reality of this is what police corruption is, was the decision made. Maybe it was. I still think it was a bad decision. I'm gonna say it. And because the problem with this reveal is that Mercurio sacrificed the dramatic elements of a show that made it popular in the first place. For what? A political critique that isn't even that good? Like, yeah, it is politically interesting, it is. But this is the man who concluded the political drama Bodyguard by having Richard Madden standing in a park with his thumb tremoring over a bomb detonator. Like, we couldn't have had something like that, Jed? Are you sure? Are you sure? It's possible to give us some interesting political analysis and an enjoyable episode. You've done it before. I don't know why I'm addressing this to Jed Mercurio specifically, because he gets bitchy when women criticise him. Anyway. Jed Mercurio, the creator of LOD, has said that the show has been inspired by real-life examples of police corruption. He has spoken in support for the late Caruana Galifia's investigations into said corruption. He clearly has an issue with the way that policing is currently being undertaken. However, I'm not the kind of critic that ascribes intention to a writer. I won't pretend to know any more about Jed Mercurio's politics than what he has said publicly. I made this video to discuss how, in an era in which police abolitionist discourse is becoming more and more popular, isn't it interesting that the #1 crime drama in the UK is a show that, in certain interpretations, could be advocating for the abolition of the police. However, I don't think that LOD's critique is as strong as it could be. I think it might actually be a lot less radical than some may interpret it to be. But I do think it's a step in the right direction. I think we need fewer shows that are outright Copaganda, saying that as soon as there's good police officers, there's always going to be justice. And we need more shows that actually say, is this institution morally right? Has it ever been? And will it ever provide justice? And what even is justice? What's the point of finding out what happened in a crime when we could be putting money towards preventing those crimes from happening in the first place? Thank you for watching this video. If you are at all interested in the products I've used on my face, I will list them down below in the description. If you want more of me and my idiocy, please subscribe. I will also leave my social media links down in the description. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, both at BooksInit. And I'll see you soon for a new video. I think I'm going to be making one either on Succession or Little Mix. Please comment down below which one you prefer to see first. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.